All right. Welcome to what is this? Our third one this week.
I know, man.
Yeah.
Been busy.
I'm
Great,
sorry.
crazy week for the Financial Heat podcast, but that's all right. We're dedicated. So, market's not doing a whole heck of a lot of anything. Thing I'm noticing is a lot of the AI infrastructure is down pretty big. Not exactly sure why that is. I have not had time to look into it, but stuff like Vertiv, which has recovered a lot. I guess that was down a lot. NVT I like a lot. Yeah, that looks the same. VST not quite as bad. So something's going on in that space. Not exactly sure what that's about. You've got Brazil selling off on Trump's tariffs. I haven't been a fan of Brazil, but I actually did buy this dip. So we'll see. And also the name I really like in Brazil. This is the dip I also bought. ERJ. This is a mid cap defense name that's selling off on those tariff issues. Market just kind of bleeding higher. I'll say what I keep saying. To me, you're going to want to watch Trump's tweets about the market. And Trump tweeted the other day, all-time highs. We're going to keep it here. So that leads me to believe that all this tariff stuff is art of the deal noise. Navarro basically came out and tweeted that yesterday. You know, you never really know who's on the ins and who's on the outs, but that kind of that goes with the thesis that I was thinking. So I think the path of least resistance still is up, but the action is going to be in the underlying themes. Bitcoin is another. I mean, that hit all-time highs yesterday. They tried to sell it off today, and it's come back quite a bit. I also bought that dip. So still what we've been saying. Direction is up, and focus on the top themes. Anything to add there, Jeremy?
Agreed. I mean, with the whole Bitcoin thing, just to start with, 110 was the resistance for a while. There's other people saying 109, 111, whatever. It's kind of in a range, but 110 seemed to be the whole number. And whenever you break a resistance, we all know as day traders, well, people who have day traded, that when you see a resistance break, it typically will tend to test that resistance as support, and then we'll decide if the trend is going to continue or not. Well, that kind of looks like what we're seeing with Bitcoin. And then interesting with ERJ, I actually like that chart. That is more performance based for price action to me, because I can see it made a really nice move up, a primary and a secondary move. It returned half and came right to the reversion target and bounced like a rubber ball. So that's the kind of setup I love to look for. Reversions are probably one of my highest probability trades. And then, like you said with Trump, anytime he pops a tweet out, saying I'm going to keep the market there, seems he's kept his word. It pulled back. People were in a bit of a panic sell this morning, but it didn't really go all that far. It just kind of pulled back to a reasonable level of support and found support and tested it, and here we are, giving back half already. So I'm going to keep my eyes peeled at this point. Yeah, pushing all-time highs can be a bit of a risk trying to buy this and sell higher, but for now, I mean, the trend is still pretty strong.
Right. I want to add a MP. Can we bring up that chart?
Yeah.
MP. Is that a story of the day?
Jeremy's in that one. I'm not.
And this is, the primary, rare earth company in America. I don't know, maybe
We
one
talked
of the
about
few.
this on the pod
Yeah.
a couple weeks ago, and I should have bought it.
I'm just here to pat ourselves on not myself, but the show on the back, because we've had three guests talk about it in the last 3 weeks. We had, John from Rare Earth came on and talked about buying this stock. This is a buy. We had, Joe from IPOX came on and was talking about this because this is a prior SPAC. So then Julian was talking about this as well, which brings us to SPACs, which is one of Mac's favorites, which brings us to Rocket Lab, which was also a SPAC. And then this brings us to Andrew J. Parlock here, who is from Space Phoenix, who is a reusable rocket startup. I think it's probably the right word.
Maybe a reusable spacecraft.
Reusable spacecraft. So why don't you tell us give us the elevator pitch on on Space Phoenix, and welcome to the show, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is super cool, and Pat, I really appreciate it. And Matt, glad to get to know you. Jeremy, haven't had the opportunity either. So thanks for having me on.
Pleasure.
Really interesting stuff. I'm so myopically focused on space and the space market. The couple minute conversation before talking about space was a welcome reprieve. Yeah, so Space Phoenix, the premise of Space Phoenix in a single sentence is we simplify access to space, and we say that concept's revolutionary. There's a lot of folks out there that are trying to get their stuff to space and now back, right? We're trying to build an in-space manufacturing market. And if we go back to our sophomore year in college, first business class we all took, you kind of need three things for a market. You need a product, you need consumers that want to buy the product, and then you need kind of the logistical infrastructure to get the product to the market and to the consumers, right? And there's a lot of conversation that in-space manufacturing is going to be multiple trillion dollars in the next 10 to 15 years. And I always say how, because we don't have the logistical infrastructure to support it. And Space Phoenix is part of that solution.
So talk about what we've talked on this podcast on a lot of different space topics. We've talked about, mining asteroids. We've talked about some of the power stuff where you can like filter solar energy down. What is in-space manufacturing? Because that's something we haven't talked about.
Yeah, so listen, I'm just going to tell you guys the next generation of advanced semiconductors, regenerative tissue, the next generation of photovoltaics, they're all coming from space. It's interesting, Matt. You asked that question. I got asked by a gentleman just about 3 weeks ago who works with a lot of credit union small investors that work with credit unions, and he runs a big conference in Vegas. And he said, "What's the thing that people even in the know are missing?" And I said, "It's in-space manufacturing. The entire market is missing what's happening in in-space manufacturing." What happens is this. Right, Mike, it's a microgravity environment. We say everything's microgravity because we're nerds, but it's a zero gravity environment, right? We say microgravity because gravity doesn't go anywhere. Gravity's always there. But you get rid of gravity, you get rid of a thing called convection, how things move. And I'll go back to high school sophomore chemistry. You get to the ideal gas equation, and things mix in a way that they can't on Earth. They can't in the presence of 1G. So you get chemicals, you get gases that mix and form in a way that simply can't happen on Earth. You think about 3D printing, right? Everyone talks about 3D printing. Well, if you're going to create a really interesting, the example that was used a couple of weeks ago at a conference I spoke at was, an eagle with their wings spread, right? Well, even if you can 3D print it, you can't do it on Earth, right? Because the wings will collapse. But in space, you can, right? In space, you can draw, you can 3D print this object. Well, then take that down to the human tissue aspect. You can start generating and printing proteins in a way that you never could in a 1G environment. So you wind up with regenerative tissues. The first viable human meniscus was made on the ISS.
Wow.
You've got retina that are being 3D printed by a company out there called Lambda Vision. Amazing company. You've got semiconductor materials. United Semiconductors, one of our first customers out of California, the first commercial company to make advanced semiconductor materials in space. First commercial company. It's been done 178 times, but they were, or depending on who you count, 178, 180, but they're the first commercial company to do it. So these breakthroughs are going to change so much about here on Earth. We're going to cure blindness. Like think about that for a second. And it's going to be done with space technology. We're going to solve the energy problem. We're going to, at least, we're going to change how energy is produced on Earth. Now, Matt, you mentioned streaming or beaming power down from space. I was involved in the largest, it was called the Space-Based Solar Initiative back in my days at Northrop Grumman. There's been a lot of effort done on, solar from space to Earth, right? Fundamentally, you have unlimited power. When you're in space, you have unlimited power.
Right,
People
and no
don't think about
clouds.
that. No clouds, pure, the sun right there.
No
It's
diffraction.
incredible, but nothing, right? It's just pure. But how do you get that from space down? That's a tough one. But man, talk about data centers in space. We know how to transmit data across large distances very easily. So you move data centers into space. You move a lot of these dirty industries off planet into orbit. And man, are you changing the game? Yeah. So and then photovoltaics. Photovoltaics are really interesting. The photovoltaic, the next revolution in photovoltaics will happen with space-based materials that will then come to Earth via our spacecraft back there, Hermes, Phoenix Hermes Alpha. Those photovoltaic materials will be made in space and brought down to Earth for the benefit of terrestrial industry. Right. So you've got kind of, yeah, go ahead.
So let's go back to data centers.
Yeah,
Because that opens up a whole can of worms.
Yep.
So what you're saying is I could take, instead of using a data center REIT, putting all these servers in there, cooling them, hooking them up to all sorts of, different energy sources, I could throw a data center in space, take energy directly from the sun. What about the cooling aspect? Do I need to pull those?
You just keep the windows open, Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just use a big fan. That's a space joke. Okay.
And a good one.
Let's. As what often happens, and this is, you asked a question that's bigger than you think it is. Okay,
I think it's huge.
Yeah, but it's even bigger than huge. Okay, so first, data centers. Like, what's the first thing what's the biggest? You guys know this already. The biggest problem with data centers is heat. It's heat. It's getting rid of the heat. It's not the power. You can get the power. It's getting rid of the heat. Right. That's the issue. So what do? Right. Yeah, Google, spends billions of dollars and puts a data center at the bottom of a San Francisco harbor. Okay, that's an interesting solution, but man, that's a crazy hard solution.
Right.
But no, so now we generate the next generation of semiconductor material in space that produces 50% less heat, or 60, 70, 80% less heat. So already we're getting some advantage, right? And then we have the next generation of semiconductor material that can have more data, less heat, less power. That sounds like we're solving a data center problem, terrestrial, right now, and that is within the next 3 to 5 years. Next 3 to 5 years, we'll begin solving that problem terrestrially. Okay, now let's go into space and think about, initially the data centers will be on, quite frankly, a platform like the platform behind me. Like, there'll be a small platform, maybe they're a couple 100 kilos. They're not huge, but they'll begin solving some of that problem in space. Now, you mentioned heat in space, getting rid of heat in space. There's no convection in space, right? There's no air, so you can't have convective currents. You can't have, you can't blow a fan in space. That's the joke. Right?
Heat sinks don't do much either.
They don't.
Oh, that's the joke. I get it.
Yeah, that's the joke. I told you the space humor is not very.
It is
funny.
pretty nerdy, bro. I gotta say.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But you can radiate an unlimited amount of heat. You have pure radiation in space. So if you can radiate the heat, well, now you've really solved the problem. Okay. So you first off, you produce less heat, right? You're in a if you stay in the shadows, you're in a it's pretty cold, right? So the heat is solved in that problem. But you still, if you use a kilowatt of energy, you got to get rid of a kilowatt of heat. We don't think about that on Earth because there's so much air currents, and we can ground to the surface, and we can dump heat to water or to a solid. It's very hard to do that in space, right? You don't have those substances. It's actually, to be honest with you, it's one of the reasons why the moon is so interesting. The moon becomes interesting. Everybody wants to go to the moon. It's just kind of cool science fictionally from a science fiction aspect.
There's great cheese on the moon, right?
Incredible cheese. But what's so cool about the moon is you have a heat sink, right? I can dump heat to the surface of the moon and then allow the moon to radiate the heat. Where I don't have the ability to do that in space. But the first generation of data centers in space will be small. The next generation of data centers in space will be literally town-sized solar farms, unlimited amount of power, sourcing massive data centers, and then we'll have to deal with the latency getting that data back to Earth. But that will be the second generation. The third generation will probably be data centers on the moon with some type of latency gap to get that data back to Earth, right? You can't move faster than light, so that still means about an 8-second latency, no matter what we do, as far as we know.
Unless we can communicate in subspace, but that's
different. That's Star Trek.
Really good stuff, man. Wow.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Yeah. So then my sense would be that we're going to eventually have all of these things up in space, up in the moon, manufacturing data, all sorts, which then I would think would necessitate a large military exposure up there, because if I put a data center in Wisconsin and our enemies want to get there, they've got to cross the ocean, go there. But if it's in space, a North Korean, Iranian satellite, whatever, could just come and blow it up, which if all of our data centers are there,
right.
I think that would kind of suck.
Yeah, suck is one word for it. That's the technical term.
Yeah.
It is it's funny. I left national security space back in 2021, and I went right into an Earth observation company where I was doing national security space, and what we call SDA, space domain awareness, or SSA, space situational awareness. It's a big data problem where you're trying to figure out who's who in the zoo, man. Like who's doing what in space, and
it's like prison.
Or worse.
Pat would know.
And then
it's the wild west, man. It really is.
There are no borders.
No borders.
There's no borders on the moon.
And there's a whole bunch of stuff up there already.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how much stuff is moving back and forth to the moon right now. It's really kind of interesting. I managed a couple projects that I can't really talk about right now, but I did manage a couple projects with lunar situation, or what we call cislunar situational awareness. The area around the moon. But what it's an interesting question, Matt, about like how do we protect assets, right? Space. I gave a talk 2 years ago on space piracy. Right? You've got some of these. Think about if you've got human generative tissues that could solve blindness or cure blindness or cure cancer, and that's up in space in a small satellite. The satellite behind you is less than a 200 kilogram satellite. Its big brother will be about 500 kilograms. That's not real big. I mean, it's 1,000 pounds, a little bit more than 1,000 pounds, right? So if I have $50 million worth of value, $100 million worth of value on that satellite, that becomes really attractive for space piracy. It sounds crazy, man.
Like
It's
James Bond ship with the
yeah,
about to come and just grab it.
it's Moonraker all over again, man.
Yeah.
Or Babylon 5 or any number of crazy stuff. So there is a real issue right now that is happening in the halls of a lot of governments where they're talking about space situational awareness and space domain awareness and space superiority and so on. And then kinetic effects, which is a very interesting euphemism of saying blowing things up in space, doesn't help anybody.
Nope.
Right? If the North Koreans want to blow something up, and I don't want to pick on the North Koreans, but if a bad actor wants to blow something up in space, woo, the down, I can't say downstream effects, but the
cascading
around
effect.
the cascading effects get crazy. So there is a sense of this conversation is going a little bit different than I expected, but that's okay. But there is a sense of mutual assured destruction that has kept everyone calm and acting well. But man, a can of spray paint in space on a $1 billion Earth observation satellite, a $2 can of spray paint,
Right.
can destroy the mirror.
Yep.
Can destroy the mirror of a multi-billion-dollar satellite. So there is some concern about that kind of stuff. It is interesting. I also thought was interesting. You talked about rare earth elements before.
Yeah.
They're only rare on Earth, and I'm not even sure how rare they are on
Right.
Earth. It's a little bit like diamonds, right? Where we spend all the money on diamonds not because they're rare, because there's good advertisement. But if you go, there's asteroids, near Earth asteroids that have
Tons of this shit.
and hundreds, if not thousands, of tons of lithium and platinum and
even
gold.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons, of probably tens of thousands, right? So then you say to yourself, well, what is really rare? Wood.
Right.
Wood.
No, wood is rare.
Wood is rare. We only know of one planet in the known universe that has wood, ours. So red oak, is way more rare than lithium.
Right.
By a long shot, by a factor of 100 million.
Right.
At least.
At least. That's probably So,
let me ask you a question. What about like space debris and space trash? Is that a thing?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about space junk a lot, right?
Yeah.
There's about 40,000 things in space that are tracked, and probably double that things that aren't tracked. And I mean low Earth orbit, what we call LEO, low Earth orbit.
Right.
Space Phoenix actually is working together with NASA to put together a technology that's already been proven at NASA, a reentry technology that'll allow us, and we actually have a couple of proposals out there right now that will actually allow us to go up and grab what we call high value debris. So defunct satellites, big pieces of stuff. Think SpaceX second stages. Well, that's a real challenge. I mean, because they're pretty big, beefy pieces of equipment. But there's a lot of high value debris up there that would be really interesting, and you could develop an entire market. Now, I think it does eventually wind up being a Space Phoenix vertical, where we're able to go up and grab a hold of maybe 1,000-kilogram satellite. I mean, it's kind of science fiction, right? But you could go up there, you could grab it and bring it back down, and then you say, well, can we recycle it? Can we reuse it? Can we repair it? Like, what can we do? Better than just burning this stuff up in the atmosphere.
Right.
But there's a lot of much smaller pieces of junk that have no value, have no inherent value, but could cause real harm. So there's a lot of effort led mostly by the Japanese, believe it or not, about how do we clean up these, what do you do with a piece of a 1 kilogram piece of aluminum that's whizzing around the earth at 17,500 miles an hour, willy-nilly. It's got no propulsion. It's got no, it's very hard to see. What do you do with that? It could cause real problems. So there's a lot of effort let me rephrase that statement. There's a lot of momentum around the effort to start cleaning some of this stuff up. But it's a challenge, man. There's a lot of, a lot of stuff with, and then burning the stuff up in the atmosphere. NASA already has multiple studies that all this stuff that we're burning up in the atmosphere that we think, that's the good thing to do is nothing more than the 1950s, put the discharge of the plant out into the middle of the river.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so we're starting to see like heavy metals in our upper atmosphere that we just don't want to have up there. So I do think in the next, we'll see, maybe next 5 to 7 years, you'll see, you're already seeing the effort, but you'll see some regulations that you simply won't be able to send your stuff up there and then burn it up in the atmosphere. You're going to have to deorbit it, and you're going to have to deorbit it responsibly, and that's going to be another whole market for Space Phoenix and companies like Space Phoenix that are building or are reliably bringing stuff back from space, right? Because you don't want to be burning it up in the upper atmosphere. Yeah, it's a whole new business. So we're waiting. We're anxiously looking around the outside on that because it would be a huge win for the market for what I call what's called the up mass and down mass. That's the technical term. Up mass and then down mass is kind of the technical term for what we do. So there'll be a whole new, yeah, of course.
So
There'll be a whole. Actually, Pat, you actually did, I think.
I invented that.
Let's bring this back to investing, because I mean that's kind of what our podcast is about. Every big technological leap, the internet, AI, space has massive winners and obviously massive losers. And and the people that identify the winners ahead of time and in position there do extremely well. So now you guys, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not a public company now.
No. We're in, I would say we're somewhere between seed and pre-series A. I don't know what the hell that means, but
Yeah.
that's kind of where we are.
Let me know when Series A comes out.
Yeah, I definitely will. You guys will.
Well, and let me
recall.
know when you want to go public through a SPAC.
Yes.
Oh,
Right.
probably sooner than later. And Matt, Pat and I have talked. So Matt, you and I probably need to.
Yeah, I pitched him on the SPAC thing already, man.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So here's the deal, right? If you go and you talk to the World Economic Forum, they say, and actually I was interviewed on both sides of this report. McKinsey's the one that did the report for the World Economic Forum. They said the industry space is going to be worth about $1.8 trillion in the next 10 years. And they said the upside, there's a $500 billion upside if we can manage the logistics up and back.
Yep.
Right. So was I happy to hear that, right? National Science Foundation came out and said, National Science Foundation together with NASA, they said, no, it's actually 4 to 6 trillion in the next 10 years. But then you got to say, well, are they being a little self-serving, right? Because they're trying to get as much budget as they can. Right. But then Larry Fink from BlackRock, who is, kind of the lady justice of he's only going to the truth, nothing but the truth, because he's trying to help his investors. He said just the terrestrial infrastructure alone for space, and that report came out about 6 weeks ago, is 7 to 9 trillion, and the rest of the industry is 6 to 8 trillion. So I got to kind of side with Larry Fink because I really like his numbers. Somehow I love double-digit trillion kind of numbers. And then you say to yourself, well, what's happening with just the microcosm of microgravity research, in-space manufacturing, and what we call tech demonstration, right? A big part of our business is just helping new space companies get their payloads qualified for space so that they can go up and then stay up there for 3, 5, 7 years. And we can go down that rabbit hole in a second. So, if we just talk about those markets, you're staring down the barrel of $1 trillion market.
Yeah,
And then you say,
and that's obvious. I mean, as you're
Yeah.
talking, about building everything in space, mining in space, your data in space, your energy in space, and then why I talked about the defense aspect, because we've got to build all of that as well. And there's
That's right.
somebody,
That's right.
and whether that's Lockheed, Raytheon, Kratos, Palantir, I mean, somebody is got to build all that stuff. There's so much going on that, yeah, I mean, whatever anyone says, it's probably going to be bigger.
I agree with that. But then you got to look at the microcosm. I look at, I try, Matt, you bring up something that happens to all of us, right? You sit here, you're the CEO of this small space startup, and you start vibrating with excitement when you start thinking about all the, where the market's going, and then you gotta calm yourself down and say, what's my addressable market? What's my, I gotta be a good steward of my investors' money. What's my addressable market? What's my serviceable? And then what's my, within that serviceable, what's my attainable? So within Space Phoenix, we talk about growing, we've got pretty firm numbers to be well in excess of 225 million to 250 million by 2029, with an outside chance of that being significantly more, depending. And that's massive. I think that's massive growth from where we are right now. We've got our first government contract. We've got our first commercial contract. We got LOIs. So we've got all the things that make us a good, investable company, if you will. But then you say, well, even with that astronomical growth, Space Phoenix would cover 0.8% of the market, of the total addressable market. So there's a lot of room out there for folks. And this is why I think SPACs, when I look at a lot of the companies that SPACed, some of the Earth observation companies that SPACed back 2022, there was 2021, 2022, there was a big SPAC movement. I think they made it was a tough position, and some didn't make it through it, and some did. I think right now, for the companies like mine that are doing these up mass, down mass, these logistical companies, let me go off on a tangent and come back to SPAC. We call it the 49er strategy. The 49er strategy is the gold rush of 1849. The folks that really made money in the gold rush of 1849, we all know the history lesson. It was the folks that made,
Matt, you call that second order thinking, right, Matt?
Yep.
Yeah. Wheelbarrows, whiskey, hotels. Those are the ones that made the money, right? The guys looking for gold, they didn't make the money. And there's a lot of folks out there looking for gold. What we're trying to do is we're just trying to help them go find the gold. And we think there's a huge, and not just us, there's a few other folks out there in a similar space. We're a little bit unique in our business model, and certainly in our team structure. But there's a few folks out there. So I think there is a room for companies like Space Phoenix to SPAC and really use that as the leverage that it's supposed to be, rather than the lifeline that it became 2021, 2022 for some other companies.
Now, are there any public companies, and not just in your neck of space, but across all aspects, that you look at and you're like, wow, I mean, these guys, they've got a great team, they're killing it, they're positioned to really dominate wherever. I mean, we think of the Rocket Labs, the ASTSs, companies like that, we started getting, we've always been involved in them, but we started getting bigger in them when Elon started getting distracted. And then you start worrying about SpaceX's government contracts. Obviously, SpaceX is the 800-pound gorilla. There are ways for investors, even though it's not public, to get in. Whether they're getting in at decent prices or not, who knows? But when that company goes public, it's going to jump. On the defense side, I think of guys like Andrew, who are not public yet. They're going to be forced to go public at some point. That's going to jump.
I think sooner than later, yeah.
Agreed.
But any public companies that you look at and you're like, hey, I mean, these guys are poised to take over, this aspect of it.
Well, yeah, let me boy, that's a rabbit hole. So let me keep it contained. I think Voyager, who just went public about a month ago, I think they've got their head on straight. They've got a great team.
What's that chart?
VOYG, we're doing a 2x on that one.
Yep.
Yeah, I think as a matter of fact, I just spoke to the Voyager guys. I think they've got their head on straight for what they're doing and where they're going. I can't say enough good things about Rocket Labs. I'm in Baltimore. Rocket Labs has got their facility where they're building Neutron just outside of Baltimore. I can't say enough good. I know a bunch of their team, just really good people doing good stuff. And they're going to be launching out of Wallops Island. They're doing all the blocking and tackling. They're building the infrastructure to make sure that's going to happen. So I really like Rocket Labs. You did mention a couple other ones. I think you will see some consolidation. Let's go off on a little bit of a tangent outside of in-space manufacturing and stuff. I want to come back to Rocket Labs and the whole launcher industry. You're going to see some consolidation in Earth observation. You already saw that. A couple companies that you never expected to wound up going Series C and Series D and not doing really great with their Series C or Series D. So then you got to say, well, they're just ripe for takeover. They're ripe for somebody to come in and consolidate. And there's something like 52, 54 Earth observation companies, and there's only so many different ways you can look at the planet. So I do think there's an opportunity to consolidate that because it's become very what's the word I'm looking for here? Just generic, if you will. So I do think you'll see some consolidation there pretty quickly. And you already saw some losers that I never expected to lose in the Earth observation space. Hyperspectral is interesting. There's a couple hyperspectral companies that have hit that are doing some interesting stuff, and they hyperspectral does a lot of things that everybody claims to do, and it does it all at once. So EO, how many damn pictures of the planet do we need, right? We already have basically. I can within 15 minutes I can get a picture of my house right here on Google right now, right? For $500. It's obnoxious. So there's only so many pictures you can take. There's only so much radar data we need, and so I think that there's going to need to be some consolidation there. But coming back to the launch market, Firefly. How can you say any more good things about Firefly? I mean, they've been to the moon. They've got an operating thing on the moon. Intuitive Machines, been to the moon twice. Both didn't end with the success that they wanted, but really great company run by really good people. Relativity Space, doing some cool stuff. And the thing is, we need more launch capacity. Right? NASA, my little company, we're on the phone with a group of NASA juggernauts about 2 months ago, a conversation that I was not expecting to be as big as it was. And it was just me. I didn't even have the rest of my team. And I wound up on the phone with about 17 folks from NASA. And I'll protect the innocent here. But they asked me, when do I get to 100 missions per year? That's over $1.2 billion a year in revenue
No kidding.
for a space station. So, and I was taken back by that question. And I said, well, I didn't know we were ever going to get there. And the head of the conversation, a director at NASA, who actually is now retiring, he said, Andrew, if you had 100 missions this year, I could fill all 100 missions. So that's what kind of capacity we're dealing with. And I say this all the time. It's a capacity issue right now. Capacity is the constraint. Technology is not the constraint. I will say, Matt, you were a little, I will say, neutral or even neutral positive on some of the stuff that the current administration has done. But in the VC market, there's been some shock waves that the VC market doesn't handle as well. So it's been a tough money raising market. So capacity is the issue. There has been some shock waves in the small VC market. I think they'll settle out. I think they will. And let's be really honest. I mean, this administration is bullish on space. If they're bullish on anything, they're bullish on defense and they're bullish on space. So I do think we'll see some of that pan out. But launch capacity becomes a real issue.
How many launches were there last year, and like how many are there going to be this year in theory?
There was 249 last year. 182 of them were SpaceX. So that tells you something. That's
Yep.
globally. This year, 179 are planned globally. I'm going off memory.
Right.
By 2029, 450 plus launches. So
Right.
more than one a day. But then you got to say, well, how many of those does a company like Space Phoenix have access to? Well, we don't have access to any of the Chinese launchers, the North Korean launchers, the Iranian launchers, the Russian launchers. So we got to take those out.
Right.
And then, well, our smallest payload, what a launcher would call a payload is what is behind you is the satellite, what we call a spacecraft or a satellite. 200 kilos, and I got to get to low Earth orbit, right? And I've got to go meet up with, a lot of times when I'm going up, I got to meet up with partners, that are already in space. Like we've got to make this all work. So I only have access. Only it's a big number. I'll probably have access to about 150 launches come 2029. But then I can put 4 or 5 spacecraft on a single launch vehicle. I can reduce that risk. But launch is a constraint in the industry, but it's being solved. Rocket Labs, Firefly, Relativity, ESAR out of Munich. I'm huge on ESAR out of Munich. I know the executive team over there. They're just solid people doing great stuff. InnoSpace out of South Korea. A big fan of InnoSpace. Again, I know the team. Honda is launching a vehicle. They've done really good. They're in partnership with a couple big folks in Japan. So there's a couple folks out there that are solving this problem. SpaceX is going to remain. You said 800-pound gorilla. I might add a 0 to that. But hey, listen, man, they did the right thing.
You ain't kidding.
They simplified it. They made it efficient. They just beat everyone to the market. They did a bunch of things that people said they couldn't do.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
So let me digress here for a minute. So when you say bad actors, do you mean like a Keanu Reeves, John Wick's going to go up there and blow up?
Whoa!
So that's all I can think, man.
Whoa.
John Wick,
Just
blow
the-
up space station.
The ramifications of that is huge because, as we're saying, the cascading effect. When you put paint flakes into space, I mean, it can cause so much catastrophic
Right.
damage over a wide area. Now, think of blowing something up. It takes
Yeah.
everybody out of the.
I don't want to give anybody bad ideas, but
Yeah.
we war gamed the heck out of when I was in national security space. We spent a lot of time war gaming the kind of stuff. Listen, man, space is Admiral Sharp in 2021 or 22, I can't remember. Admiral Sharp's a pretty imposing guy. He was running the NGA, I think, at the time. At Space Symposium, he got up on stage and there was like 6,000 space nerds out in Colorado Springs at the Space Symposium, and he grabbed the podium and he said, he led with this statement. He said, "Space is hard." like really, really James Earl Jones kind of
Right.
moment. And everyone cheered because we're all nerds, we're all like, woo. But not that hard. We've been to every planet. We've left the solar system. We've got 12,800 satellites in orbit. We're tracking another 40,000 things. We've been to the moon. We've been to Mars. We've got stuff on the surface of Mars. We've got stuff on the surface of Venus. Like, it's not that hard, right? It is hard, but it's not that hard. And it's getting easier. So then
Right.
you got to say to yourself, man, have we made it too easy? Because there's, bad actors, and I
Right.
wouldn't put Keanu in that category. But
Oh, you like
but
Keanu?
I
God, he's like
love
the
Keanu.
worst.
Come
I love
on.
John Wick, but I hate Keanu. All
Ah,
right, a real question though. Next one.
yeah.
So, difference between UAP and UFO, right? Because I feel like there's like it used to be cool to say UFO, but now if you don't say UAP, and then when I say UAP, people think, is this some like regular guy taking our word away from us? So, what's the right word, UFO or UAP? Or the
UAP
both?
is the right. No. UAP is the right word. UAP is the right word.
Oh,
And it's because unidentified flying. I'm not sure exactly, and boy, we could go down a whole nother podcast on that.
right. Well, we might,
But
dude, because I love this kind of
yeah,
shit.
We have an ETF coming out for
Well,
UFO disclosure.
yeah,
So
so he knows Dan Farrar. That's what I'm getting to. So we talked about the age of disclosure. Andrew and I did before, and this
mhm.
is what I was trying to get to. So we talked about, the movie. He knows some of the players. I was hoping you would touch on that. Were you telling me like they're mining for stuff on the other side of the moon, or was that some other friend of mine? I can't remember.
No,
Is that
no,
you?
no,
I
no. That
told
was
you that.
me.
Oh, you
Yeah,
told me that.
Yeah.
no, yeah, that was also probably me. The Chinese have two rovers on what they say the dark side of the moon. There is no dark side of the moon. Let's remember that,
Yep.
except Pink Floyd. Um,
Right.
but the Chinese do have two rovers on the far side of the moon. Um, but UAP, listen, there's too much data right now to say that this stuff's there's unexplained stuff happening, right? So they changed it to phenomenon because it's not just there's lots of things happening, right? They're just not necessarily objects is the point. There's phenomenologies that are occurring, and I was involved in some really, really deep with the world leading experts. I was just listening and having my mind blown by the second kind of thing. So yeah, UFO is just old terminology. Unidentified aerial phenomenon is the going consensus right now.
Got it.
But Larry James from JPL, he said it best. And we had a conversation with Larry James. I actually got to sit right next to him at breakfast. It was just amazing. Larry James runs JPL, the only organization that's been to every planet. Um, and somebody, he got up on stage and somebody asked him the question about UFOs and aliens and so on and so forth. And he had a really great comment back. And he said, it's the tyranny of distance. Like, space is freaking big, man, and
Right.
it's really hard to get things here. So in Newtonian physics, or even Einstein relativity, it's impossible to get from our galaxy to another galaxy, or even across our galaxy. It's impossible. In the quantum realm, if you want to go there, it's not, right. You theoretically, there's some conversations you could have, and where are we as a species, as a sapient species, hominids or whatnot, going to be in 1,000 years? I don't know. So then you have to ask your question. That gets into a whole nother rabbit hole that I don't think we have time to go down.
There's one.
And my guess is we don't know nearly as much about physics as we think we do.
I could not agree more. Could not agree more.
Quantum physics is just a scratch on the surface right now.
So Andrew, so do you, again, I'm not trying to put anything on you, but like, do you believe there is alien technology on our planet that is accessible by regular people like us, or, even smarter people than us?
Once you added the last piece in, I would say, yeah, right.
Here's your accessible alien technology.
No, but seriously,
Yeah.
like, is there warp drives in any warehouse somewhere that we don't know about?
That's a real tough one to answer. I have no insider information on that one. I would say there's nothing we have access to as Homo sapiens. Let's leave it at that. Is there some things out there that we can't explain and there's just so much data saying, whoa, like we need to figure that out. There's somebody from the National Science Foundation. I'll protect the innocent again. They said it best. They said. Unidentified aerial phenomenon, like there's stuff happening. We need to know what's happening either from a defense aspect or from a science aspect, right? We want if scientifically people are that or beings, sentient beings are that far ahead of us, we want to catch up and we want to know what they do. And from a defense aspect, if there's a bad actor out there using this technology, well, we need to know that too, right? So there's a lot of reasons why you want to know it, they're not just curiosities. They're national security and I would say scientific imperatives. So that's why there's so much time and effort being spent on UAP.
Right. But like, so let's say all this stuff's on TV or whatever in the news where there's, 30 looking like bright objects flying around in the sky at these strange speeds and all this. Like,
so
what is
I'm
that?
I'm from, my dad lives in South Jersey, and last summer we had the big scare in Jersey.
Yeah, like that. Like, what is that?
In the end, it was just all the same BS. It was just drones and planes and stuff, and people didn't know. And you look at certain. I'll never forget as long as I live. I'll never forget this one moment. I was driving past a relative motion's a bitch, right? Relative motion really messes with humans. So I'll never forget this as long as I live. I was driving up in the backwoods of Maine, near an Air Force base, and a big C-130, not big C-130, C-5 was coming in. And relative to my motion, that C5 did not move relative to how I was moving, right? So we can take that the other way and you can see things, relative motion, it messes with humans. And most humans don't have the physics background to say, oh, well, the relative motion and so on and so forth. So I think that's part of it. And then people are just curious, right? Why are there people that believe the Earth is flat or believe that we haven't been to the moon? Meanwhile, right. I've held lunar material in my hands, right? So I think creating these unknown monsters helps people wrap their head around the fact that they got a D+ in high school physics.
Right.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, all right. Yeah. Jeremy, you must have some questions here.
I had a couple of them got paralleled, so I'm good with that. But there's one that kind of stands in my mind. One is the Chinese are obviously mining the far side of the moon. They're looking for helium-3. Is there anything leading to being able to synthesize production of helium-3 in low Earth orbit with the use of current technology?
Mm-hmm. So that is interesting. I hesitate to use the word they're mining the far side of the moon. They do have a couple of rovers that are up there, and we've got our eyes on them. Remember, we've got 4 satellites orbiting the moon right now. We have really good lunar awareness right now as a country. Helium-3, man, woo, that is exciting stuff. I've no pun intended. I've lost a bubble on it a little bit. There is a lot of effort, right? And it does take a lot of energy to process and to create usable fuel, which is the big winner there. And then that changes things. That changes things a lot. And for all intents and purposes, that's what the moon's all about. Is probably helium-3. So I hesitate to go much deeper than that because I'm kind of at my limits of expertise on that, but I can dig into it for you.
I mean, the other part of it is that it can solve a lot to do with the cooling issues that we have with current technology for data processing. So, I mean, you gotta remember, man. So everyone always forgets that, and I don't know why, right? That we have 4 laws of thermodynamics: 1, 2, 3, and 0. Yeah.
Right? These are laws. Okay? They're not theories like Newton's laws of motion, the universal law of gravitational attraction, and the 4 laws of thermodynamics. So in when you create a kilowatt of anything, you've got to get rid of a kilowatt of something, right? So you can't create a kilowatt of power, you got to get rid of a kilowatt of heat, or like that's kind of it, right? So I'm not sure helium-3 solves those problems. What it does do is solve a lot of what I was talking about before, that Space Phoenix is trying to solve, the up mass and down mass problem.
Right.
If the stuff's already there, I don't have to up mass stuff
You don't
to
have to.
solve that problem.
Right.
I don't have to up mass things to fuel things or whatnot, or even up mass solar panels. Like I have access to helium-3 and processing facilities in space to use fuel in space, in situ created fuel for in situ created processes.
This fuel is
That-
weight too.
Yeah, of course, that's
Yeah.
everything is, right? You know, that's the dream.
Right. All
Yeah.
right. So, last question, like, and you know, where do we find you? Can you pull them up, Matt? Like, you're at Space Phoenix, Space-Phoenix, right?
Space-Phoenix.com. You know, we are, you know, we're a little company. Oh, can't be reached.
FOE.
No, yeah, I was like, wait
Yeah.
a second. I was like, did I
All
not pay
right.
my bill?
PHOE, not FOE.
Did I not,
Huh?
OE? Yeah, there you go. I was like, did I not pay my bill this month? We need some work done on space. You know, there's a couple things I do want to point out that Space Phoenix is doing different. And this, well, actually, Matt, do me a favor, go back to that last picture. They say a picture's 1,000 words, and I'll give you 1,000 words for this picture. But here's what's happening today, and this is what separates Space Phoenix from a lot of the folks out there. We're doing this for the benefit of terrestrial. Like we created this image so that we're bringing the value of a space to terrestrial industry, to Earth. That's what we need in the next 10 to 15 years. Eventually, we're going to need space for space. But for the next 10 to 15 years, Space Phoenix is focused on delivering the value of space back to Earth. And that philosophical difference is a big change from what a lot of people. Now, Matt, go to the picture that you just showed, the other picture, because everybody, all of our competitors, and so on and so forth, and let me be honest, it's $1 trillion market. We don't have any competitors. We only have partners in the industry that are trying to solve this $1 trillion problem. That's what we have. But everyone starts with this picture. Everyone starts with, you know, the Earth in the background and the satellite floating above the Earth, which is great because we are a space company. But in the end, we have to remember why we're utilizing space. We're utilizing space for the benefit of humanity, right? We're bringing back rare earth minerals or rare earth elements, or, you know, for the benefit of humanity. We're 3D printing human tissues in space for the benefit of humanity. Right. So I think that's a big philosophical difference about Space Phoenix. And really, you know, the other thing about Space Phoenix, man, we don't build payloads. We're the FedEx box truck, man. We're a box truck. We want to get your stuff up there and get you back. We want to help you complete your mission, and we want to take the burden of the spacecraft. That's why we say we make accessing space simple. And that concept is revolutionary, right? That's the whole premise, because space isn't that hard. But if you've got to build and innovate at the bleeding edge of semiconductor technology, or at the bleeding edge of human tissue generation, and build a satellite, and go find a launch, and figure out how to return it, that's asinine. We don't do that on Earth. So Space Phoenix is trying to take the burden off. And I know we're kind of coming up to end here. One of the things that we just did, and we're doing it with the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland has been ridiculously supportive of Space Phoenix, but we are building together with the state of Maryland a dedicated in-space manufacturing center of excellence, because we need to bring these companies together and then take the burden of the spacecraft off these companies. That's the only way the industry as a whole is going to accelerate, right? Pat, when you and I talked, I think I might have used this analogy, right? And we're Baltimore, so I'll talk about Under Armour. Under Armour makes some of the world's greatest athletic gear. They do not then buy or build trucks to ship their stuff to a store that they own. They focus on athletic gear, and they do the third party logistics, which is in the end what Space Phoenix is. So what Space Phoenix is trying to do is make space business like business. And I think that's a winning combination. I think our business model in the end, and Matt, this goes back to something you asked earlier, right at the beginning. There's going to be winners, there's going to be losers, there's going to be some big losers as well. And there already has been, right? People that were bet on very, very heavily. First off, the bet on Space Phoenix isn't that much. A little plug for Space Phoenix and investing in Space Phoenix. So the bet on Space Phoenix isn't that much. And the other thing is, we are staying in our niche. We know the problem that needs to be solved.
Are you doing a raise right now?
Yeah, we're in the middle of our raise right now. We've done pretty good. It's been a tough capital market, but we've done pretty good. We're about 60% done with this raise. And once let's call it 50%. I don't want to. My team always tells me I'm too optimistic, but you can't be a CEO and be pessimistic.
Right.
All
right.
Yeah.
Well,
yes.
Space Phoenix.
Space Phoenix. Matt, you got to get off the stage question.
No, I mean, I think you answered it. I mean, I think the key, for us is there's so much more going on in space than we've ever talked about. And, right now the transformational investment opportunity we're in is AI, but space is next.
Yeah, I think space is sitting under AI right now. Like AI is easy, it's sexy. You see it, you use it every day. Who hasn't used Chat GPT already today? Like I cannot raise my hand, and Pat, I know you can't either. Right? So, but and space is a little, it's funny because it's been so Star Trek, Star Wars. That's how we still think about space. And then you tell people, you ask, there's a funny question I always ask, like, how far away do you think the ISS is? And, the answer is always 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 miles. And I'm like, we're closer to the ISS right now than we are to Pittsburgh.
Yep. People don't realize that the atmosphere isn't really that big. It's very small comparatively.
Yeah, relative to the diameter of the Earth, if the Earth was a basketball, the atmosphere would be a wet basketball.
Yeah, not even a sheet of paper.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
And to add, I know that a lot of people have compared the space logistics industry to like the technological breakthrough of the railroad, but I think it's a lot bigger than that. I mean, with the railroad, you had a lot of after the fact, you had a lot of consolidation, and there were a lot more bigger companies than there were smaller companies. Here, we're like starting the railroad, but with the advent of the diesel electric locomotive intact beforehand. So now we've got something that can accelerate in orders of magnitude much quicker than a railroad could. And the general thinking of people,
that's a good analogy.
In relative to space travel, people still think of it in a sci-fi mindset. They don't realize this is really happening. This is now. This is here, and that's the hard hurdle to get past for investment purposes. But I think there's going to be a lot more people ahead of this than there who are going to be not the last ones laughing, but the ones who get it and can actually translate that down to the people who can't get past the sci-fi barrier.
That's exactly right. And it's funny. We actually equate it more to the internet. When the internet came on board, everyone already had a computer. Everyone had cell phones.
Right.
Everyone had digital cameras, right? And then all of a sudden, the internet shows up, and it connects all those things in a way that they weren't connected before. So, like today, we have rockets, we have satellites, we have payloads, we have a space station, albeit it's not long for this. Well, it's not long for the atmosphere or the space, but we're now connecting these things in a way that they've never been connected. And it was funny. Somebody asked me, what will I consider success for Space Phoenix 10 years from now? And it's always the same answer, that no one even talks about us. And the analogy I use is, I made the joke about AI. Everyone used some form of AI before they got on this phone call today. Who hasn't had a package delivered to their house or business in the past week? Okay, no one.
Right.
Tell me what the box van looked like that delivered it. You have no idea. You don't care. All you care about
Right.
is your package. That's my dream for Space Phoenix. My dream is, this might actually be my get off the stage. We're actually working with a fine spirits company right now to age spirits in space.
That's cool.
I want that little, my silly little Burt Reynolds Phoenix behind my head there. I want that painted with the company's name. I don't want my name on there. Here, paint
Right.
your name on there. I'm a Baltimore guy. Let's paint the Ravens on there and take a picture of them from space and have a football on there and kick the first space football. Like that's what I want to. I just want to fall into the backside, manage the logistics, build the infrastructure, and let everyone else be the heroes. I don't need to be on the thing. We want to make money. We want to be good stewards of our investors' money, and we want to have a friggin' massive return. And we're getting there.
Very, very cool.
Right.
Now that's a
All
wrap-up
right.
question.
That's a good. No, I think the wrap-up question is: can I upmash my ex-wife into space, Andrew?
Oh, there you go.
There will be a time, but I'm not going to comment any further than that.
All right. See you guys.